The first 15 minutes of a sequel have a lot riding on them. They have to please fans without alienating newcomers. They have to teach those who don't know how to play without boring those who do. Most of all, they have to expand upon what made the original great without treading the same ground. This is the first 15 minutes of Dark Souls and Dark Souls 2. The first Dark Souls came out in 2011 to almost unanimous praise. When a sequel was announced the following year, it came as a surprise to almost nobody. It dropped on March 11th, 2014 to great reviews, but was mired in controversy. From Software had released a 10-minute demo a year prior, and the differences between the two were astounding. This sort of thing isn't uncommon, but it was a bit different here. The original version of Dark Souls 2 used its lighting engine as a gameplay mechanic. Areas were so dark that you had to decide whether or not to forego a shield in order to carry a torch. That lighting engine was stripped away from the final release, yet the torches and the level design remained intact. The change was made as if it had no more effect than the usual E3 graphics downgrade. As minor as this seems, it's indicative of Dark Souls 2's overall design, which lacks the careful ingenuity of its predecessor and feels haphazard in comparison. You can see evidence of this throughout its first 15 minutes. Dark Souls 2 was designed to be more accessible than the original, and one of the toughest hurdles for any new Dark Souls player has always been its first 15 minutes. It's obvious that Dark Souls 2 did everything it could to lower that hurdle, and one of the first things to go was the difficulty. This was probably an obvious decision to make at the time, but it ignores how important Dark Souls' failure state was to understanding the game. Dark Souls challenges you early on so that new players learn how death works as soon as possible. You face a full-fledged boss before you even leave the Asylum. Dark Souls 2 provides no such challenge until you start exploring the world beyond Majula. This was a huge oversight. Death is the defining mechanic of the entire franchise. You need to know how it works in order to enjoy the game at its most basic level. Yet, Dark Souls 2 doesn't clue you in until you're knee-deep in the game. This change also robs the player of the game's most addictive feature, its sense of accomplishment in the face of overwhelming odds. This loop of dying and retrying before finally claiming victory over a boss is one of the most principal reasons why Souls games are so exciting. The first Dark Souls gets you hooked on it immediately, while Dark Souls 2 withholds it until you defeat the last giant, an hour or more into the game. You can see the same carelessness when comparing how each game handles its tutorial segments. Dark Souls 2 throws some instructions on tombstones, while the first Dark Souls gives us instructions via the same orange messages that we'll read throughout the game from other players. Both methods accomplish essentially the same goal, but the way Dark Souls handles it pulls double duty. Not only does it teach us the basics of the game, but it also introduces the message system. It's these kind of small but smart design choices that are absent from Dark Souls 2, but are a major characteristic of Dark Souls 1. Not only does the first Dark Souls have a better teaching device, it also finds better context for introducing mechanics. Take parrying and backstabbing, for instance. The original introduces this moments before we run into a shielded enemy, a common adversary that's best defeated by parrying and backstabbing. It teaches us using a common situation we will find ourselves using throughout the rest of the game. Dark Souls 2, on the other hand, tells us right before we run into an enemy with its back up to us. It lets players off easy, and fails to show how the mechanic will actually work. Other mechanical mainstays are absent from Dark Souls 2's first 15 minutes entirely. Most missed is how Dark Souls forces you, step by step, to equip your gear before facing off against the Asylum demon. Seeing how equipment affects your stats is crucial, but Dark Souls 2 simply does it for you. This moment is another perfect depiction of the understated but brilliant level design in Dark Souls. The archer at the end of the hallway forces you to seek refuge in a nearby room, where there just so happens to be a shield and instructions on how to equip it. The game channels you into a situation where a new skill is needed, teaches you that skill, and then lets you use it. It's clear and concise moments like these that Dark Souls 2 desperately needed more of.
In the age of ancients, the world was unformed, shrouded by fog. A land of grey crags, arch trees, and everlasting dragons.
But when it comes to storytelling, Dark Souls has always had a flair for the ambiguous. Vague item descriptions and cryptic NPCs do little to shed light on an impenetrable and mysterious world. We're left with a library of rumors and half-truths, puzzle pieces of a story that, even when assembled, don't form a complete picture. This ambiguity jump-started Dark Souls' online community, spawning entire YouTube channels dedicated to fleshing out the mythology, but it also placed a heavier burden on whatever story elements remained. The first Dark Souls understood this.
With the strength of lords, they challenged the dragons.
Though the intro cinematic does little to nail down specifics, it firmly establishes the game's themes and atmosphere. By mimicking the creation myths of real-world religions, the game builds the impression that this story has been told since antiquity, muddled by retelling and time. It creates a palpable, almost biblical atmosphere before you even start the game. This careful world building also carries on into the design of Undead Asylum itself. Everywhere we look, we see decay. It's in the people, the walls, even the air around us feels dead and long gone, and there are glimpses of an even greater horror that do little to calm our nerves. We know what kind of world we've stepped into. We see what the curse of undeath has done to humanity and what's at stake if we fail to fix it. But we don't know how to fix it until we run into Oscar, Knight of Astora.
There is an old saying in my family. Thou who art undead art chosen, and thine exodus from the undead asylum maketh pilgrimage to the land of ancient lords. When thou ringeth the bell of awakening, the fate of the undead thou shalt know.
This is an important moment for Dark Souls' first 15 minutes. Not only does he free you from your cell and set you on your quest, but he provides just enough emotional motivation to drive us forward.
Well, now you know, and I can die with hope in my heart.
The idea of fulfilling a dying man's wish is something we can understand, something that's built with real-world logic. These games are so impenetrable that a small human moment like this, that only lasts 3 seconds, goes a long way towards keeping the player grounded and invested in the story. This attention to detail is even present in the names Dark Souls chose for its starting area. Firelink Shrine and Undead Asylum both reinforce story and theme, while in the sequel, Things Betwixt is just a cool name that means almost nothing, and Majula means nothing at all. Remember when we said Dark Souls knew how important the remaining story elements would be in a minimalistic narrative? Well, Dark Souls 2 really doesn't. In fact, if you were to take Things Betwixt out of the game entirely, the integrity of the world would remain completely intact. Do the same to Dark Souls, get rid of the Undead Asylum, and the whole world crumbles. Things Betwixt ends up feeling more like a gated-off tutorial section, disconnected from the rest of the world, instead of being part of it. There's also a complete lack of motivation or objective in the first 15 minutes of Dark Souls 2. We're not sure of the state of the world until we arrive in Majula, and have no idea of what our goal is until we talk to the Emerald Herald.
Go on and see the king. He who made Drangleic what it once was, King Vendrick.
You will never meet the king with a soul so frail and pallid.
Seek those whose names are unutterable. The 4 endowed with immense souls. Their souls will serve as beacons. Once you have found them, return here to me, so that hope will not fade away.
So, if we understand this correctly, the player character and others have come to Drangleic to find a cure to the curse, which Vendrick might have. But our soul is too pallid to see the king, so we need to go kill 4 immense souls to make it less pallid. We have no idea where these souls are or what they're called. Compare this to Dark Souls 1. First, we have Oscar, who gives us our initial motivation, and then we meet the crestfallen warrior, who says,
There are, actually, 2 bells of awakening. One's up above in the Undead Church. The other is far, far below, in the ruins at the base of Blight Town. Ring them both, and something happened. Brilliant, right?
So in a fraction of the time Dark Souls 2 took to tell us less, Dark Souls 1 establishes our objective, our motivation to pursue it, the path we should take to get there, and the major themes of the overarching story.
Perhaps you've seen it, maybe in a dream, a murky, forgotten land. A place where souls may mend your ailing mind.
Dark Souls 2's most quizzical departure from the original is its intro cinematic. While the first one was pretty easy to follow, this one is so odd and arcane that it's nearly impossible to know what's happening. Who are the woman and the child? Are they supposed to be our wife and daughter? And what about this portal? Is Drang Lake in some other dimension? Then why did the old lady in the intro tell us that Drang Lake is to the north? And what about these spirits dancing around the lake? We never see them again. They only appear here, so what do they mean? The intro wants desperately to feel profound, but it bears no meaningful correspondence to the actual game. It's ambiguity for its own sake. It's as if the developers were trying to replicate the style of the original without truly understanding why it worked so well in the first place. And that's Dark Souls 2 in a nutshell. It's still a fantastic game, at times an even better game than the first, but its first 15 minutes fall short in a lot of areas. Many people blame its questionable design choices on Miyazaki's absence, and there's probably some truth to that. But it's also because Dark Souls 2 was a game that was created to meet a demand, not so much a game that really wanted to be made. And we see a lot of hints of this throughout its first 15 minutes. It's like pieces of a game were rearranged and dropped on their way out of development, and none of the developers cared to pick them back up and put them where they belong. What we get is a haphazardly constructed Souls game in which we can still recognize the ingenuity that made the first game a masterpiece, but it never clicks into place like it should.